Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Gifted, the latest episode of The Flash, as well as the latest episode of Black Lightning. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you don't want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I go to a time when to start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I have to say about this week's episode of The Gifted, you can skip to what I say about this week's episode of The Flash, and or skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Black Lightning. But the first thing I want to talk about is this week's episode of The Gifted. A lot of interesting things went down this episode, so let's break everything down. First of all, we learn more about the mutant that they broke out. Her name is Rebecca, and obviously she's kind of a little more reclusive. The Frost sisters, as well as Lorna, are all kind of pushing her to be, because like obviously she's the key to Reva's next step, and so the whole situation of like Andy stepping in and being like, no, I'll talk to her, because for Andy, he's like, you guys are treating her like a weapon and, you know, a thing rather than a person. And it seems like him talking to her actually kind of got her opening up, because, you know, he talks about the fact is that he knows what it's like, you know, to kind of be alone. That feeling is like, it doesn't necessarily, you'll still kind of be alone in this place, but at the same time, you'll be surrounded by these people who are like a family. He's like, he talks about his own family. He talks about his sister, because he'd already felt guilty about what he did last episode. He was like, because when he looked at everything that's happened, he looked at like the thought he hurt Lauren. He's like, I could have killed her, but Lauren was like, no, the fact is you pushed her hard enough just to get her out of the way. But also looking at everything that's kind of like getting incited around the country because of this situation makes Andy kind of a little hesitant about that. But it seems like those hesitations kind of disappear when he kind of hangs out with Rebecca, which we quickly learn what Rebecca's ability is, and it's very fascinating. Essentially, she's able to turn things inside out, which is fascinating, because she describes it in an interesting way of like, not where people can move things up and down, she can twist and turn them. Like, the fact of the matter is she writing Andy's name on that glass like that and then reversing it, because that shows you how powerful that is, because it's a certain area of effect, because doing that should have probably like broken the glass, but she's able to shift it without like destroying the structure she's shifting around. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because nothing she shifts ever completely breaks. Like, you even saw the can, all the can did was turn inside out. So like I said, she twists everything around, and I thought that's kind of just a fascinating aspect to her ability. Like, obviously we're just seeing the beginning steps, but probably like even more applications for that later on. I mean, there's like the very dark side of things where like immediately learning that about her power, I'm like, that's going to get used on a person at some point in time, or it's about to be used and someone stops, because you know that's going to, I mean, potentially whoever her character is, she might be someone from the comic books that's had to have happened at least one time, like turning someone inside out like that. That's pretty brutal. And that might be something that they hint to. They probably won't show in the show if they decide to go down the route, but you kind of can't help but feel like they would. Once again, now, like I said, that depends on whether someone stops her, but it seems like it takes a little bit of effort to use her power in that regard. But I mean, depending on probably the object, you know, how big it is and or how small it is will determine like how much force she has to use to kind of do it. It's kind of just like Andy when he's like using his ripping power. It's kind of interesting. I guess like their powers they're similar in that regard of just like what they are, like him ripping and her kind of just turning. And so it's just kind of interesting. I think maybe that's kind of something they bond over to. I mean, just the fact is that Andy's super nice to her. She understands like, oh, he's trying to sell her on this whole aspect, but he's in the end, she's in like, I don't care. Okay, like you already had me at milkshake. I thought that was kind of pretty neat. But like the fact is they attacked that police car. I think it's so interesting because I think she feeds something in Andy that he couldn't get from anyone else. Like, Andy's kind of got permission with her to do whatever he wants to. I mean, that's kind of the main reason why he's like, I can be me. I don't have to hold back. I can do me. Like, he was so worried about the whole Lauren situation, but see how he completely forgot about that, because he found someone who accepts him for him, and it's like, who's here by his side. It's like, my sister wasn't here by my side, but look, Rebecca is. She's here for me. We're happy. Things are good between us. So that's where my brain kind of takes that, as Andy kind of feels like he has permission to do whatever he wants to now, because he doesn't have to, because for one, he doesn't have to do it alone. Even with all these people there, even Lorna and everyone else surrounding him, he still feels alone there. And now he doesn't have to, because he has Rebecca, you know? What's interesting though is you see Lorna's face, because Lorna's like someone in her condition, like after being locked up the way she was, because we end up finding out from acid mutant dude Michael that basically she was the most locked locked up mutant at that facility, because those mutants in that area are the ones that weren't collared, but she amongst anyone was like the most drugged up and everything, and the one that couldn't really go outside. Like, she was the one that was kind of locked up the most. So that kind of shows you, I mean, for one, it's probably just in how powerful her ability is. I mean, I guess that's why they kept her heavily sedated, because if they didn't, she could probably just like get out. I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm wondering, like, you would kind of think, I guess, like, with the way everything's structured, like, she can turn things inside out. It wouldn't mean that she'd be able to escape a prison. Like, I mean, maybe she would. I don't know. Like, I don't know how that would work. Like, I mean, I guess it could be used in certain applications. Like I said, we'd have to wait for the show to really kind of show the full applications of what she's capable of doing, and just how, like, so it probably wasn't a combination. It might have been a combination of just being dosed, but plus, like, her ability probably wouldn't be really good at escaping the circumstances they set up her in. But nevertheless. But the fact of the matter is, like, we kind of seen that she kind of has a dark side. Like, she hates cops and stuff like that, and she kind of did that. Like, nothing happened for her to spark to do that. It's just like she did that. So I think she kind of has a dark streak in her, and that might end up causing some issues between her and Andy later on. But maybe that's just me. But you see, I think Lorna sees that dark side of, like, yeah, like, there's some issues there. This might either be because she was locked up for all that time, it kind of made her a little dark and twisted, or it could be that's who she was before, and just this whole situation, her being locked up, just aggravated it. I mean, cause we see how Lorna turned out, and maybe when Lorna sees Rebecca, she sees her, like, sees herself, like maybe a girl that was put through a traumatic situation and kind of came out a little damaged by it. So you just see that look on Lorna's face, like she's concerned. So I'm interested to see what it's all about. We do see that they have her training to turn a vault inside out. So whatever they're doing next is kind of a heist. So they had talked, the Frost sisters had talked, well, one in particular talked about the fact that Reva's not there is because she's laying the groundwork. So I'm very interested to see where that all goes. On the other side of things, you have John in a hospital. Like, obviously there's this whole situation. Lauren's okay, but Caitlin's just kind of lashing out a little bit at John. It's like, oh, why didn't you do enough? It's like, he's like, all those mutants around, I lost all the trails. He's like, but I promise you I'll get Lorna and Andy back. And then, Caitlin ends up apologizing to a lot of people, because for her, it's like, she blames herself for Lauren getting in that situation. It's like, she wouldn't even been there. Like, you wouldn't even have been there. Like, things got bad because we were so desperate to get Andy and Lorna back that we weren't prepared. And she kind of apologized because she feels like she pushed Lauren to do that. But Lauren wanted to do it. And that's what kind of broke her a little bit, is the fact that Andy's so steadfast in his beliefs, which even his foundation was kind of shaky this episode. But now I feel like it's solidified just because of his experience with Rebecca. So I think it's going to be even harder. Even if there was potential of reaching him before, it's going to be even harder to do so now, because he has, Rebecca by his side. So, but John's desperation can be seen too, because he's just as desperate as Marcos, as desperate as Caitlin. They want the people they love back, and he also wants to, because obviously what Evangeline had said about, like, oh yeah, like, having to kill these people you once considered friends. So he doesn't want that. He wants to try and rescue them. He wants to save them. He wants to kind of make up for his past. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to redeem himself. But like, Caitlin's trying to tell him, everyone's trying to tell him, is like, he has nothing to redeem himself for. That was outside of his control. Like, everyone's trying to blame you for what went down, but that was beyond you. I don't think anyone else could have done better in that situation. Other people, want to make it seem like they could, but, John was in an impossible situation. That's why even Evangeline was kind of like, yeah, like, I put you in a situation you were going to lose. It was a lose-lose situation. You're in a situation that you were never going to win, And so that's all pushing him to be so desperate to get any answers he can. We had the purifier showing up at the hospital, which Jace is a part of that. He even suggested, like, oh no, let's not go after the protesters, because if the video goes up, we'll make the mutants into martyrs. We'll kind of get sympathy on their side. But it's like, hey, we arrest these fugitives, then everything's good. Like, obviously Jace is going even further down this line, because a lot of his life is kind of falling apart. Paulus sent the papers for divorce and everything, because it's actually kind of interesting. I like that little thing we got at the beginning where we kind of saw that, obviously Jace wasn't always very anti mutant. It was more so just because of his July 15th is what set it off for him. But like, even a person he was working under or working with, he's like, oh yeah, my partner died from being poisoned by a mutant just from a routine stop pulling over a car and he died. And it's like, you wanted me to have that same conversation with your wife and newborn child. So it's like, yeah, because the guy was very prejudiced. It's like the kid's like, oh, why do you want me to show your ID? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just chilling here. I'm waiting. And he like tases him. It's like, I was almost worried because like the way he landed and stuff like that. I thought he bumped his head hard, but it turns out not to be the case. But even Jace, you could tell it by his expression, was kind of like, that's not cool. Like the kid wasn't doing anything. So it kind of shows you where he was at one point in time. That was 12 years ago after all. But like I said, maybe eventually spending time with that particular partner or seeing things from a different point of view from that guy, of him being kind of very like prejudice towards mutants, maybe that eventually rubbed off on Jace, and it was there bubbling beneath the surface. Or maybe he was very positive about, I don't know, like we get glimpses of him like around that time or whatever, so we don't really 100% know how he felt about like in between the event of July 15th and that 12-year period. We don't know how he really felt about mutants in that time frame. So maybe he was a lot more pro alien, pro mutant back then, but nevertheless, you see it even in this episode in that regard of like him present day, like trying to stop the dude from beating. It's like, these are regular people you beating up, but it's like, oh, they're traitors and stuff like that. That even with the circumstances being what they are, even Jace has his lines that he's crossing some lines, but on other lines he's not willing to cross, because I guess it's like, no, this dude's a human. We're not going to hurt some human just because he's sympathizing with the mutants. Yeah, he's an issue for that, but it's like, why do we have to beat the crap out of him, threatening to hurt him for it, you know? We see him get some files at the end of the episode, so ultimately they have a lot of information on them, so he's like, oh, we know where they live, so I guess this information, the files they got on every mutant that's ever been there, so that means they're probably going to track them down, or just files in general on all the mutants that were there, so they had their names and stuff like that. So he's like, we hit them at home and stuff like that. So we'll see how that turns out. Well, because it can't be the other mutants, because all those mutants don't have home. Obviously, I'll get to that in a second. So it has to be all the patients that were there before. So that's about to turn ugly. You already had Sentinel services cracking down heavily at the beginning of the season. Now this purifier is going down the route that they have been going down, because even Jason's like, oh, we need to spin it so that the purifiers are the answer and not the problem. They're the solution to this mutant thing. So there's that. It makes you wonder how far you're willing to go, Jace, because of your vendetta and stuff like that. You're not willing to see any other shape or form. These mutants had nothing to do with what happened to your daughter or anyone else on 715, yet you're just taking it out on them. And it's like, oh, how far is too far? How much is enough? How many mutants do you have to take off the streets before you're satisfied? Does every mutant have to be locked up behind the bars? Even mutants who don't have dangerous abilities? Does that even matter? Because that comes up in this episode, because one of the people they save is a lady who has light orbs. That's her whole power. They literally don't do anything. She calls like a panic happened because her powers went off, and it's like, oh yeah, they tried to send her to jail because of it, but then like one of the jurors wouldn't convict her because it's like her orbs don't do anything. They don't hurt anybody. So they shifted it and made it go, oh, no. She's sick. And doctors are like, oh, she can't be cured. And she was locked up in that mental facility for years because of that. Just because people lied and shifted everything. Just because they wanted an excuse to lock her up. It's like, oh, she's a mutant. She's dangerous. We need something to lock her up with. We'll say she's sick and she's mentally unstable. Boom. That's all they had to do. And they took away her freedom for years. Which is interesting. Even after all that, she's very positive. It's kind of interesting because her and Marcos are kind of kindred spirits. And I never really thought of it that much of like, till she kind of points out like there's always a little bit of light within every darkness, even in the darkness. And it's kind of interesting because that's what Marcos' power being, which I thought was kind of interesting. They are kindred spirits. In fact, their powers are connected to light. But it's like, yeah, Marcos might be the light in the darkness in certain regards. Just the aspect of his ability and stuff like that. Just kind of interesting when you think about it like that. But we have a lot of different perspectives in this situation going forward about how things are and how they should operate. Clarice turns to Erg. I guess it seems like she has to have popped down there because like even Marcos is like, how do you know where to go? And he's like, oh, I love the whole like, oh, how did John survive down here? It stinks. With his senses, it's gotta suck. And it's like he breathed through his mouth. And then Marcos does it. Oh God, I can taste it now. But essentially, you can tell Erg is shifting Clarice's perspective because in Erg's perspective, neither side is doing great things. Like the Hellfire, the Inner Circle, doing what they're doing, trying to kill people, not something he's signing up for, but he believes what the Mutant Underground wants is a pipe dream. It's like acceptance by humans. It's like, I don't want that. I don't need that. I want to bring our brothers and sisters, mutants together, not having to worry about, they'll be able to accept themselves and be in a place where they feel safe. Humans, like, your John, your boyfriend wants kind of once again, it's that whole aspect of tolerance. You tolerate what you hate, and it's like we don't need that. I'm not trying to be all buddy with humans, which is also interesting because we've learned a little bit more about Erg's ability in a sense of like what it works. His ability, basically, he absorbs and hits back with whatever you hit him with, which is interesting because, like, I guess from a video game perspective, just kind of thinking about it, it's like it's a parry / counter. So he absorbs with the parry and then he counters. Well, I guess parry is like the counter itself, isn't it? That's what I'm going down a like freaking nerdy route. I'm not going to do that. Nevertheless, but then there's the whole conversation. She's like, "Well, what happens if if you don't get hit?" And he's like, "Well, if he doesn't get hit, he doesn't have anything absorbed or to hit back with. So kind of like, you don't fight me, I won't fight you because I won't have anything to hit you with." So, but yeah, they're stealing food and supplies for everyone down there, and so you can definitely tell it's shifting Clarice, or rather Blink, because we get her mutant name in this regard. I'm not really good at keeping up with names, so I just kind of call everybody by their like names. Like, I never really call Lorna Polaris or John Thunderbird. I'm sure they brought up Marcos's name before. And his Eclipse? I think that might be it. I might be wrong about that. So I wonder what Lauren and Andy get one. Probably, I don't know. But never, because I think I looked that up before. I could be 100% wrong. I think they're the TV show original characters. Like, the whole Fenrir thing is something from the comic books. Their great grandfather and great aunt, that whole situation, like, oh, like that is in the comic books. Those characters, the siblings with the Fenrir power, they're from the comic books, but Andy and Lauren aren't. They're the gifted specific. So I thought it was kind of just interesting detail. Like, I recently found out. I never looked that up until recently. So, but nevertheless, he's kind of obviously he makes it seem more appealing down there in the Morlock community, because it's like, oh yeah, like, we don't judge you. You don't have to pretend to be human. And that even includes Clarice. I thought it was kind of interesting too. Like, they have to mark themselves. If you have a physical manifestation of your abilities, like Clarice, the way she looks, her eyes, her scars, her ears, which I never noticed her ears before. Maybe just because her ears are covered up most of the time. But I never noticed. I was like, the scar in her eyes, sure. But it's like, he's like, that would be acceptable already, so you wouldn't have to have a mark. But those who look human, you have to bear the M, just because it's like, it's showing that you embrace who you are. You're not afraid to accept who you are. So that's Erg's whole thing. And so you can definitely tell that this is shifting Clarice's thought process on everything, because it's like, she wants to stay with John because it's like, yeah, she's been a part of this. They brought her in and kind of made that her home, but now she probably looks at this Morlock group and kind of sees like what they have, instead of like, whereas like John and the Mutant Underground wanting to kind of bridge both worlds is kind of like something that might not be possible. That is nothing more than a pipe dream. She sees something that's in front of her that's concrete. It's like, this is proof. Humans are just going to hate mutants. We can't change the hate in their heart. We shouldn't have to. We just live to ourselves and accept ourselves. Obviously, don't go down the inner circle route trying to kill humans. It's just like, hey, they do their things, we do our own thing. So I'm interested to see what that does. You almost see this look on Marco's face, like you can tell by the way Erg and Clarice are kind of looking at each other, like Marcos is kind of potentially putting two and two together in that regard. But we'll see in the end what ends up happening from that. Because especially with everything that, Clarice is feeling now, but also John's going through something too. He wasn't like, Caitlin lied to him about the whole Michael situation that kind of made him flip out, because for him, it's just kind of like, for him, he just feels like he can't win. It's just failure after failure. It's like, I'm not going to let this guy die, because it's just like, I've already failed so much before. It's like, for John, he needs a win, and he just, he thought the whole Lorna and Andy situation could be his way to make up for the Mutant Underground failure, that he thinks of himself as. And so I'm very interested to see where all of this takes us in the next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of The Flash. A lot of things went down this episode, so let's break everything down. The main threat this episode is Spencer. She runs like this app called Spin Zone. Essentially, she's kind of, reporting the news and stuff like that. Apparently, her and Iris have a past. Apparently, they used to kind of work together at the same place, but then it's just kind of like, oh yeah, she kind of did whatever she wanted to. She did whatever she could to get famous, to tell a story and stuff like that, kind of ignoring facts if they didn't fit her need. And so that's why Iris is kind of very suspicious of her more so than anything, because like obviously she's the one that's posting up about excess, Nora on like her app and everything, but it's like, no, I don't want you doing that, because it's like, hey, that's my, obviously that's my daughter, and if you put her name out there, it's going to lead to Cicada deciding to come after her, like if it kind of seems that she's kind of around a lot more, because he's run into her twice, but he doesn't know that she's in this area. But if he knows that she's in this area, and if she's constantly posting up like, oh, this is where Cicada is, that's how he found out about Cisco and stuff like that. In particular, like, Vibe, to be more exact. But still, you get what I'm saying. So it's interesting. And her warped perspective of it, of just being like, oh, I'm gonna make her famous, and oh, what's a little bit of danger? I mean, you reported on the stuff with the Flash, and Iris is like, it's different, and she's like, oh, do as I say, not as I do, type of thing. Which is like, well, Iris knew about all that stuff because she was neck deep in it. Like she was there anytime Barry was doing stuff. So it's not like, I love it because Spencer's like trying to have the high ground when it's like, in actuality, you're spinning stuff. You're literally creating these problems by basically making it so that stuff happens so that you'll be the first one to catch the story. Even later on, using Nora to try and kill her own dad, which is messed up on multiple levels. One, because apparently Nora is super into Spencer. Because I was wondering about that the entire time. Like, I mean, Nora just being who she is kind of like, she's super like shitty in this episode to her Iris. She had already been shitty before, but even more so in this one, because it's like, oh, taking pictures of the food and being like, oh yeah, glad to see that you've never been good in the kitchen. It's like, you don't even have to say that. You're being hurtful. And then going as far as Iris being like, oh, where'd you get the phone? And it's like, oh yeah, Dad got it from me a couple of days ago. And Barry's like, yeah. And you have Iris look at him like, what did you do? It's almost like, because it's almost like, wait, you gave her, it's almost like, oh, you gave our teenage daughter, like obviously she's not a teenager, but it's almost like the whole aspect, you gave our daughter a cell phone? You did it without my permission? Like, we didn't have a conversation about that? You just made that choice on your own? Oh, lo and behold, everyone on the team has her number except for me. It's just little things here and there. It's just kind of sad, and just like she's constantly digging at Iris the entire episode. It's like, oh yeah, look at, oh, Spencer's app has got like 3 times the following that your blog does, and it just, even like Cecile and Caitlin around are like, ooh, kind of rough. It's like, why you go that far? So part of me thinks it's just, but it's also because I think just because she knew it would bother her mom, so there's that. But I think it's also just because she was super into Spencer, it seems like, because like there's kind of flirting going back and forth, and then Nora's not like pressing the button to see if she's a vet or not. So I'm like, which is kind of like, don't get suckered just by a pretty face. There's more than just a pretty face to anybody, but I think that's the extra reason why she was super believing. Because like, it's, I guess she didn't want to give her mom any credit. Like, oh, mom thinks it's Spencer. There's no way. You gotta be wrong. Doesn't mean that she's the one. It's like, why were you cutting her so much slack? Is it just because your mom was coming up with a theory? But I think it's also just because you naturally had a thing for her too. Because you're like, oh, wow, you like Spencer just as a person. So I guess that kind of undoes what I said about just the whole pretty face thing. But then it's kind of like she gets in front of Spencer and sees it, and it just kind of like, she kind of turns to mush a little bit, which is kind of adorable. But yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing. But like going back to it, like that's what kind of makes that situation messed up, because it's like you kind of already into her, and she forces you to try and kill your dad, which was so sick. Just like the little speedster moments. And what was so interesting, and it's something that Nora had brought up before about her power, and the fact is that she can rewind time. Like I said, without full on time traveling, she can rewind time a couple seconds, or at least for a little bit. Because we see it, because Barry's kind of ahead, and then he stops, and then it starts like running backwards. So it's like, oh wow, that's her way of catching up to him. It's like, I wonder, because it's not something she fully has control of. But I mean, every speedster's kind of got their own thing, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of interesting because I don't know. Because I mean, the whole throwing lightning thing, I guess that's Barry's thing. I can't remember if other speedsters have done that or not. Like, I mean, Savitar never did it, and Zoom never did. So I guess throwing lightning is like Barry's specialty. I mean, obviously it makes sense why Nora can do it. Whoa, does Wally do it? I don't remember. I guess every speedster has their little special thing, and I guess that's Nora's special thing. And like, obviously, you talked about the fact that she can do that, like, little bit of time rewind. So that was kind of an interesting thing. And it's like they didn't make a big deal of it. It just kind of happens, but it's kind of like, yeah, it's like a little conversation that like came back in that form, and I thought that was kind of pretty neat. Even the fact is, it was scary that she was so close to killing Barry because she literally had her arm faced through his chest. It's like, ooh, this is getting rough. But it's like, you were that much of a dick, Spencer, that you're literally getting one hero trying to kill another. That's kind of a shitty thing to do. But in the grand scheme of all this, you also, on the other side of things, had like Ralph doing his investigation into Cicada. Like, Ralph was on point in this episode because Sherlock didn't really want to listen to him because he's like, oh, we got to look into the mask. It's like, oh, the mask is just to cover it up. And even I'm like, no, there's some validity what Ralph is saying, because the mask is more than just covering up his identity, because it's like the way he's breathing and stuff like that. Like, obviously there's a reason behind that, and it's like Ralph was kind of on top of it until they got to the place, and it's like, oh, all the workers there wear it, so it's kind of like, okay, I guess we can't track him down because there's too many people here. But they were so close. But it gave Sherlock an idea. I love he pissed Caitlin off so she can punch him in the chest, and it's like, oh, you're making the same exact sound as Cicada because there's a problem in his upper respiratory area while he's breathing through the mask. And it's like, okay, all of this ranging from what happened with Spencer and Cicada all revolve around enlightenment, which is so interesting on so many different levels, because the event that was supposed to make the dude who's originally supposed to be Cicada in the other 37 Earths, and why this Cicada is this Cicada, is because of that one special event, and that was Enlightenment Night, and that was Nora joining in. That was a crucial point that changed everything, because of the event that was supposed to make that dude Cicada made someone else Cicada. And it also seems like that's connected because Spencer herself isn't a metahuman. Her tech is, her phone was, which we kind of show her like chasing stuff. Because at the beginning I was like, because we saw that Cicada has a daughter, so I was wondering if that was who that was at the beginning, but it turns out not to be the case, because she's up there like taking photos and stuff like that. Well, she's taking videos of like, oh man, look at this crazy stuff that's going down. The satellite's going down, and she's rushing towards it, which is kind of like, yeah, she's kind of willing to do whatever it takes to get those, attention, essentially, get that following. But yeah. So now the metahuman situation is different. It's not just metahumans they have to worry about. They have to worry about people with metahuman tech on top of it. And it seems like that's what Cicada's whole thing is. The whole thing about his chest, what that wound is about, whatever fragments of the satellite that hit him, it must be like in such a position that doctors couldn't remove it without killing him, and now it's been festering in his chest, and it gives him the abilities, as we see, like he crushes like that metal thing or whatever. So it's like, oh, so he's superhuman strong, and that same thing applies to his knife. His knife must be a piece from the satellite in some shape or form. Like maybe, because it's all about, because there's dark matter was infused in that satellite. So it's making tech stronger, and it's also why Cicada became the way he did. I'm assuming his daughter got hurt in that explosion, the Enlightenment as well. So maybe he blames the Flash and Excess in particular, because I don't know. Because that's the thing, like, because even he kind of originally talked about it last episode of like, you let all these metahumans go, so maybe he was blaming them for that, or maybe it was something else that happened beforehand. Even before the Enlightenment happened, maybe his daughter was already in that condition, and now he's in a position where it's like, no, I can fight back against these metas who are the reason why my daughter, I mean, we even see it in this episode. The mayor quit because there's just thing after thing after thing in Central City. It's just one of those things. It's a conversation I brought up before earlier when I was talking about Supergirl this week, where it's just kind of like, yeah, it's just one of those cities where it's just like stuff is going to go down, and that causes issue. That's kind of like what gave birth to the villain on Supergirl, the Agent of Liberty, that whole situation. So it's like, I think the same thing kind of applied in this one, because she made such a fuss last season about like, oh, trying to change things in Central City. And it's like, yeah, Central City's hub world for like a lot of crazy stuff. So, and all the stuff that went down this episode probably was making her like, you know what, I'm done. It's just one thing after another in this city. So maybe Cicada was personally affected by like metahumans running rampant. We might kind of see a similar thing in Agent Liberty storyline as we see with Cicadas, maybe. But yeah, that's kind of an interesting thing. It makes you wonder, like, is the whole him and the blade, because obviously the blade has the whole power of dampening abilities. And I guess it makes sense on some level because it's filled with dark matter. So maybe its dark matter has the power to overwrite other dark matter. But it's like, why do their powers kind of work so in conjunction? Like, maybe that piece that he's using as a blade is a piece that came out, but there's fragments still inside of him. Like, the piece that they pulled out of him is the one he's using as a blade, because it looks like it's a slash. So it looks like something was there. So the wound isn't closing up. So that has to be from the original blade. And maybe because it was the blade used against him, like, because the dark matter in that blade affects the dark matter inside of his chest, in the sense of, like, well, maybe that's why they also work in conjunction, because they are, like, of the same mind, of the same thing. Like, the dark matter in his chest combined with the dark matter from the blade, just because they were fused together. And so there's a bond between them, hence why he's able to just summon it back. And there is that, like, he has such control over it like that, which is such a fascinating thing. I'm like, that's so dope. So now we kind of finally understand Cicada a lot more, which also, like I said, brings up the fact is we're going to have a lot more interesting things happen in Central City, because, like I said, regular people are going to have powers now. And it's like, the last thing you want is criminals running around. Having high tech is one thing, like, you know, having like a Heat Wave or Captain Cold situation in that regard. But it's like, no, you're going to have that even more so with all these different criminals. Like, anyone, not just criminals, regular people in general could end up having superpowers without having the superpowers directly. So that is an interesting aspect. Also, what surprised me is that Sherlock, I'm just going to say Sherlock. I'm not going to go to the trouble pronouncing it like it. It's just going to be Sherlock. I was actually surprised he gave Ralph credit, because I was so sure he was just going to be a dick and Ralph was going to be like, hey, dude, I set this all up for you to figure that out. But he's like, no, you figured it out. You were right and I was less right. And I love that. It's like, you can't even say that you were wrong. So there's that. Now, the other big news in this episode is we finally find out why Nora is so pissy towards her mom. It's sad too, because they were almost working together well, because it's like she helped Nora put the flames out and she's like, so good. And Nora's like, thanks, mom. And it kind of made Iris happy. But then in the long run, it turns out that in actuality, Iris in the future had put a dampener inside of Nora her entire life. And she didn't actually know she had powers until 6 months ago. And now it turns into that conversation of, why would I do that? Because for Nora, it's like, you've lied to me my entire life. You hid a part of who I was, which does play a part. And the fact is, like, okay, so the speedster gene does pass down. Because, you know, obviously there's the whole aspect of the speed force, which I'm surprised has not come back in any shape or form this season. Obviously it played a role last season, but I'm curious to see if it kind of comes up this season or not. But like, it does seem like it isn't just like oh man, like the Speed Force chooses you. It's a common, I guess it's because if it chooses one person, it chooses the people in your bloodline too. So the natural ability to be a speedster, I guess, is there. All it has to be is like the Speed Force kind of channeling its power to you. Or maybe you're already a speedster, but the Speed Force has to give you even more of a push when the time comes for you to really come into your abilities. Whatever the case may be. She always had her powers, and Iris hid them from her entire life. And the question is, like, why would I do that? Because it doesn't matter, like, that I didn't do it, or if I'm like, I wouldn't do it. The fact of the matter is, at some point in time, I did it. And that's what breaks Iris's heart, because like, why would I do that to our daughter? And Barry's like, in all honesty, all you ever do is care about family. So I know whatever you did for her sake, because you would never do something like that to hurt her. You would do it out of love. And Iris brings that argument up again. And, you know, because what hurts Nora the most, it's like, because it kind of puts her at odds, not just with Iris, but also Barry, because Barry took her side, because he was like, he knows the kind of person Iris is, and the only reason she would do it is out of love. But what bothers Nora the most is like, I didn't hear it from you. I heard, like, I didn't even learn about it from my mom. Now, two things with that. One, like I said, it causes that rift between her and her dad, which her and her dad have been so good now, but now it's kind of like, oh, that's kind of gotten a little soured. I immediately chalked that up, though, her stealing her abilities, like, well, what about Cicada? He was never caught, and he was a metahuman killer, so there's that. But I think at the same time, it's probably like she lost Barry because of Barry's abilities. Like, that world of him being a superhero, him being missing like that, she already lost Barry. She wasn't about to lose her daughter to this world. She couldn't take the chance. Whatever happened to Barry, maybe she actually knew the truth about Barry, what happened to him. Probably not, but just the fear of that happening again to her daughter, the last piece of Barry she had left, she probably couldn't take that chance, so she didn't let it happen. That's why she took Nora's ability. That's what I'm talking it up to. But the second thing, and I think it's the most important thing, is what she said. I didn't find out from you. Remember what Sherlock said last episode. Somebody gave this mission to Nora. Someone implied to her like, oh, you need to go back in time and do this. So it's like, who did it? Was it someone that's still around from Team Flash who did it? Or was it someone in particular that sent her back in time so that she would change things? They were hoping that by telling her, letting her know all about this, that she become reckless enough to come back in time and change things and kind of create like an alternate future. Like someone is potentially benefiting from this. You know, sure, I was under the impression it was Iris, but it's like, no, because I was thinking like, oh, Iris in her grief and stuff like that. It's like, no, in her grief for Barry is probably the reason why she sealed away Nora's powers. But this, it's like, she didn't even tell Nora about her ability. She had to find out on her own. Hence why she's also like a newbie at all of this, because that Iris wasn't even there to train her. So I'm assuming like that's even more probably reason why her and her mom don't get along in the future. So the question is like, they probably butt heads even more about it, because it's like, because for Nora, she felt different. She felt like there was something more to her. And like, that's why she kind of always felt like a bit of an outsider because of that whole situation. So now it comes to the question of why, you know, is that the reason why Iris did it? That's my immediate thought. It could be one of those two, but I think maybe the second one about it just being like she didn't want the same thing to happen to her to happen to Barry, because it's like being a speedster, being a hero, put her in the spotlight, put her in danger. It's like, you're my daughter and I just want to protect you. Maybe it does lean with the cicada thing. I feel like more so the second thing, but then again, it's like, well, what about Joe? Like Joe made exception with Barry. But at the same, wasn't that the whole issue last season too? Was like the moment Iris kind of got abilities, like she had Barry's speed, Joe was very like protective. Same thing kind of with Wally. Like when Barry did his thing, he just kind of let Barry do it. But when it came to Wally and Iris, I think if I remember correctly, he was protective last season when Iris got powers too, didn't he? Maybe he didn't. Maybe it was just Wally. I can't remember. But yeah. We'll ultimately have to wait and see ultimately where that goes. But obviously, Nora's staying with Cecile and Joe, so that's going to be interesting to see where that all ends up going. What I also thought was kind of fascinating too is just kind of a little detail. Apparently, Barry sucks at sports. It's crazy to think about it. It's like you're literally the Flash and you suck at sports. Because I get it, you're not using your powers and stuff like that, but you would think you'd kind of give yourself, I guess, because I guess that shows you how honorable Barry is. He's not trying to use his powers for good, but it's all, for like personal gain like that. But it's like, dude, you suck at sports, because everyone's like, yeah, he's super bad at sports, but at least he's coordinated when the time comes. I'm like, that's crazy. That's ridiculous, dude. To think that the Flash is that uncoordinated. It's so good. So it's just kind of a little small detail, but yeah, I'm very interested to see where this all takes us in the next episode with all of this. And what other tech metas or objects infused with meta abilities will come across this season. And now moving into this week's episode of Black Lightning. Quite a few things went down this episode. First of all, Gambi ends up telling Jeff the truth about what Anissa's been up to, which leads to a big argument between them. Basically him saying like, I have my rules, and if you're living under my roof, you got to follow my rules, because Anissa's kind of like, because for her, she realizes that there's something bigger going on here. All these properties getting bought up, but Jeff's also like, the fact of the matter is you're making the clinic a target, which it is later on, but for Anissa, it's kind of like, it's so much more than that. We have these powers, we need to be using them. But at the same time, it's that tough spot of Jeff wants to help and stuff like that, but it's like you going out there using your powers. The thing is, Anissa thinks as long as she's not, full on in her gear like Thunder, then it's not drawing as much attention, so you don't have to worry about going back to her coming back to her family in any shape or form. It just feels like, okay, there's someone else just robbing them and stuff like that. But for Jeff, he just feels like her going down this path, it was like, yeah, they're already crossing a line as vigilantes, but you doing this, like, it's kind of almost like you're helping out the clinic and stuff, that's fine and dandy, but it's like you're doing it through blood money, it's like money you stole from the beginning, like that was money. It's like, you understand, because it is kind of like a Robin Hood situation, steal from the rich, give it to the poor type of thing. So is it really that bad? But it's like, no, it's just like he doesn't want her to commit one crime to justify another, which is, once you get to the semantics of it all, it's kind of like, well, you're kind of doing that already with the whole vigilante thing. So there's the whole issue in itself. But it's just that difference of opinion where it's just Anissa feels like, yo, I'm grown. But at the same time, it's like, your dad has been doing this a lot longer than you have. So you got to kind of give more props in that regard. But for her, it's just, she feels like it's her dad not listening to her as a partner, as like, oh, we're partners in this. It's like, no, it's just kind of like, and I guess maybe that's a dynamic they're kind of going for. Because really, this is the first time that's happened in the show in this regard. Like, obviously having like, well, not really, because obviously it's happening with the Flash. Supergirl's had her sidekicks and stuff like that. And even Oliver's had his, but not in a sense of like a family thing too. Like, this is like, no, like they're blood related. So that's why I'm kind of like, the Flash is kind of tiptoeing in that direction now. I mean, I guess you could make the argument with the whole Wally situation a little bit, but for her, it's like, for Anissa, it's like he's coming at her more as a dad than he is, Black Lightning, or, a partner in a situation. It's like, it's almost like he's undermining everything she does and what she represents, her, where she is as a hero. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't blame her, because everything she is doing, she has a best of intentions. She's trying to do some good, like, while they're under this situation, being under watch by Tobias, as well as the ASA, just all of that. So ultimately, they ended up saving the day and working together. I even love, like, Lynn whispering in Jeff's ear, like, she's like, oh, I'll give you guys some alone time. She's like, don't forget that you cried after she left. So it's kind of like, oh, you missed her like crazy. So don't keep that in mind before you say something you might regret, and not, kind of. But they ended up kind of squashing everything. So they're in a good place. Obviously, they still have a difference of opinion about it. For Jeff, it's just like, the thing is, like, if you're not careful, the road between us and them is very slippery. And if we're not careful, we could easily go down the wrong path and end up becoming like them. Because even something Lynn said, even in your younger days, like, how close were you to, like, crossing that line, So you never stole or never killed, but you came so close to that edge, like, so it's that situation of, I think on some level, maybe it's because of Jeff's own past, or at the very least, Lynn making him realize that about his own past makes him go, okay, I need to, understand, realize that, hey, I was in the same situation as Anissa at one point in time. So I need to kind of not only have her look at herself in the mirror, me too, and kind of look back on my mistakes as a young superhero in this type of situation. So the lady that set up the bombs ended up getting away. What was interesting is because Tobias had that all set up with the people he's working with, and now it's kind of like, it was meant to, draw out. Well, obviously they don't know it's the same person, because I think they're probably still under the impression that, like, the whole Thunder situation is a different person from the girl that's robbing him. Maybe they kind of put two and two together, but they knew Black Lightning would show up, so they wanted all this stuff, monitoring equipment and stuff like that, so that they could catch him, because Tobias wants Black Lightning dead after everything that's happened to him, so he wants to find out who Black Lightning is to take him down. And obviously this does cause even more issues, because now Tobias is going to come down even harder, because it's like, I got to take you all down, and I know you're here messing with the money that's circulating in this situation. So you kind of figured it would come down in that shape or form, but still. Things at the ASA aren't going good, because Jace, I was under the impression, I was kind of thinking, like, she programmed her system to kind of figure out when the kids were going to die, essentially wake up and die, because, like, they're already in a state of almost dying. It's just being, like, sleep is keeping them from dying. And one kid woke up and activated his powers and died. And Jace is saying, like, these kids are all going to die. It's just a matter of when. And when they die, we can use this data to figure it out. But part of me was kind of like, the fact that she was so calm, cool, and collected, part of me was wondering, did you set it up for him to die? But it's like, no, she just set the algorithm, like, whereas Lynn was trying to make sure, take a more optimistic point of view of trying to save their lives. Jace is just kind of like, they're already dead. I just got to time it out to figure out when they die. So there's that, and just kind of sadly looking at them more as experiments rather than people. But then she figures out the whole DNA situation. Obviously, she doesn't know who the DNA is associated with, but it's like, oh, here's a stable metahuman. And on top of that, here's two other DNAs that are closely resembling this one, but these two samples don't have the vaccine nor green light in their system. So it's like, hey, kind of pointing out what, no one really knows in this show, which is like, once again, this show's the first show to ever really dive into that, which I guess now you can say that The Flash kind of has dived into it now with what kind of came out this episode about like metahuman abilities being genetic. So, which is kind of already, obviously we knew that in season 1, but now they're catching up, and it's like, now that Jace is knowing that, now the ASA knows that, so this is getting closer and closer, and Lynn is literally watching as like the walls are closing and potentially on her family, especially the way Jason's like, oh, can you imagine experimenting on it, literally using the word prod, poke and prod, which you think like, oh yeah, that's how people describe what the government would do to you in those situations. And it's crazy to think she would actually use those exact words. But nevertheless, so now that creates an even more danger in the situation, because all the while, like Jennifer is trying to learn how to control her abilities. But her problem is something in her head is it's the whole Khalil situation, because Khalil is kind of like, for one, he was her best friend for such a long time, and on top of that, like, he was her boyfriend, and it's like there's that special connection between them. And I think even in her mind, when Khalil came there to be the bad guy, and she's like, working with Perina and taking all her power and is trying to put it in a box, she can't, because I think there's a part of her still holding on to who Khalil was, like talking to him and stuff. Like there's a part of her that just can't quite let him go or quit him. So that's kind of preventing her from really going to what she needs to do to completely control her abilities. I'm wondering, because Perina asked her about Khalil, but we don't know if she really went into depth talking about him. But Anissa knows that Khalil was trying to contact Jennifer, which was interesting, because Anissa's like, he killed Dad, and she's like, he killed Black Lightning, and she's like, really, you really going to be taking up his side on things? It's like, why would you even get all semantical like that before? I mean, I guess it's like after her last meeting with Khalil, she's kind of calmed down just because she's had him on her mind so much. Obviously I kind of felt like it even before it got to the end of the episode, but I knew she was going to eventually turn to Khalil, because for her, she feels like the only other person she could really talk to was Anissa, but now it's like Khalil, is the closest person she has, especially with everything that's happening, because her parents are keeping her locked up, making so that she can't go back to Garfield. But it's like, it's all for her protection, but for her, she just looks at it, it's just like, you're walling me in, you're trying, but it's like they're trying to protect you and the rest of the family. But for Jennifer, she feels like it's just like, oh, like you're doing this to me, I've done everything you asked me to, and now here you are doing this to me. And it's just like, once again, it's like, you understand, for one, she's a teenager, so she's going to take all this, and like, it just obviously is so frustrating, but at the same time, it's like, understand why they are doing this. You can't control your powers right now, and things are not looking good. Like, your family is at threat. Like, if things don't go right, if they don't keep this all on the wraps, like, your family could end up on some science table, the government's table, as some science experiment. So that's that side of things. But her turning to Khalil is interesting, because obviously Khalil is still neck deep in this 100 Tobias situation. So if Jennifer makes the mistake and opens up to him about things, which she easily could, but I don't know if she'd go down that route. She hasn't so far, but maybe she'll feel like, oh, this is the Khalil I knew before. Maybe he's faking it. Maybe there's a little bit of him bubbling to the surface, but maybe eventually something will kind of make it so that Painkiller kind of ends up being who he is full time. I don't know. Like I said, at times she just feels like he's the only one she can really rely on. He's kind of going through changes, not the same person he was before. So, I'm sure he was the person she talked to about everything anyway. So now it's just kind of even more so complicated situation with all her secrets currently. So, also in this episode, we had the whole Kara situation, which is kind of sad. Like, she ended up dying. I wasn't expecting. I was like, oh, I thought she was going to get better or something. It's like, and because Gambi kept it a secret from everybody, because still secrets all around. But she was going to die anyway. There was no fixing her situation. Sepsis is already set in. I love it. Like, she's like, you lying, hypocritical bastard. You're trying to tell me to make peace and stuff like that. You're not better than me, which Gambi's like, I'm not. But I've tried to atone for what I've done. You don't have a lot of time to. So Kara ultimately does die. For for her, it's kind of interesting. Like, she ends up saying at the end, like, she didn't know what Proctor had up his sleeve. She thought what she was doing was part of, like, the full-on ASA. Like, she didn't know, like, Proctor had kind of gone rogue and kind of did his own thing. So, it's kind of sad. Because I was wondering, because it seemed like, because it's so sad, because like Kara's whole situation was just so far away. Like, it came close with Gamby, so you thought it kind of circled back in some shape or form. Well, I thought it was kind of interesting, her being like, I want you to burn my body and not bury it. I was like, what is that about? I guess because she feels like if she's buried, like, Tobias could, be the psycho he is and do something in that regard. Like, he did talk about the fact that didn't he threaten to, like, peel the flesh from her bones or something like that? So maybe she feels like that could still be a possibility. At the very least, if she's ashes, then she doesn't have to worry about that something happening. Well, we do know that Lala came back from the dead, so maybe she's kind of worried about that. I mean, maybe it's connected to what's in that briefcase, which we still don't know what it is exactly. But she left her phone to Gamby, which has all that information in it, trying to figure out what Tobias is up to. Which, speaking of Tobias, Jeff is kind of hit with the unfortunate news of like, oh yeah, Tobias is getting free because he's done everything. Like, I thought, to cover up what he was accused of, Alvin's murder for 30 years ago, kind of making himself, now he doesn't have to hide in the shadows. He can step out in the spotlight because it's like, oh, they've got nothing against me. I've been falsely accused of this crime for the past 30 years. I didn't realize that was the main thing keeping him. Like, I figured it was a big thing because I was like, why specifically that and why now? It's because like, no, because now that he has what he needs, he can step out in the light. And it's like, oh yeah, because Alvin's murder is the one thing that was kind of held against him for the past 30 years. But there's so much wrong with that because like there's no evidence to prove that Jeff was there, because like the only evidence would be Jeff's testimony because he was there, he saw Tobias do it. But Gamby, trying to protect him at the time, telling him not to say anything, covered everything up and got rid of any DNA evidence proving that Jeff was there that night. So which I guess she's like the ADA or the DA herself, is it Montez is her name? Interesting enough, it's Sally, is it Richard or Richardson Whitfield? She's been on a lot of things, but the thing I know her best from is Allison from Eureka, so that's pretty dope. So that was kind of cool. So now that's kind of a big issue in that regard. Then there's also like everything going down at Garfield, where like two students are fighting, and Jeff was able to kind of squash the beef, but Lowry shows up, expels the kid who hit first, and it suspends the other one. And Jeff is like, you don't have to do that. And Lowry is kind of a dick, but at the same time, you understand. It seemed like he has the best of intentions because it's like no kid is going to get shot, kidnapped, or overdosed on green light here. Oh my! So it's like Jeff kind of interprets it as like, all he cares about is, getting a bigger paycheck. To me, it seems like he does care. He's very strict in particular about everything. But Jeff is kind of like, if you expel this kid, you give him nowhere to go, and he's going to become the problem rather than something great that he has the potential to be, because you leave him no choice but to turn to these streets. But Lowry is very stuck in his ways, and he's very particular, because obviously it's the whole thing of like, the way Jeff was running things didn't work out. So it's kind of like, how I run things is going to be more efficient. And you even have Jeff wanting to take everything back. He wants to take Garfield back, but then becomes a situation of like, well, what does he do? There's a whole board situation. Like, they obviously have their issues against him because they think he wasn't there. So it's like, how do you remedy that situation? Like, how do you fix this? I wouldn't know about how to handle the first steps in going about handling this situation, so. But like I said, we got Tobias kind of running rampant with the 100 again, and he's kind of free from the spotlight. So I'm curious to see what he does in his public image to kind of set himself apart, like what he does to make himself seem legitimate. I'm curious to see what that is, as well as what his ultimate plans are, because we still have no idea. Also, once again, still no Lala, even with this 100 situation. Does he have Lala off running, doing something else? I have no idea. Maybe Lala just ain't in the season at all. There's so much about his situation we still haven't gone over yet. That's why I keep bringing it up. But maybe that's going to be something set up for the future, where it's like finishing up Tobias's arc is the big thing this season. Maybe figuring out whatever's going on with Lala is going to be something, like I said, something in the future. So I'm very interested to see what the next episode has in store for us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good Bye.